This brazen dinner-time escape by a 33-year-old Victorian woman from the Howard Springs Centre astounded everyone inside.
Everybody started filming it. We're like, oh my God, jailbreak!
She threw her luggage over and then easily cleared the fence.
The second she jumped over, we all freaked out because we just wanted to call, to let the wellness people know, let the police know.
In response to their 000 calls, she was picked up by the police within 15 minutes and fined $5,000.
This is a very rare event. We're still going to be investigating it just to make sure that we're really confident with all the elements of security there.
But it's been one of several breaches in Howard Springs, where new arrivals from hotspots have mixed with those about to be released.
There's been rave parties, there's been breaches, and now this latest incident where someone simply jumped over the fence and walked out shows that the security is just not up to standard.
The NT government is also still being forced to defend its support for and secrecy about the use of a Darwin hotel to quarantine 300 foreign military officials. Defence has offered assurances it will be carefully managed, but the opposition's worried about hotel staff going in and out.
We can't afford to have COVID-19 released in the community.
I have complete confidence in the management of this facility and how Defence are going about it.
The NT government is continuing to manage arrivals from interstate by carrying out extensive interviews with people about whether they've been in a COVID hotspot. But the police and health staff carrying out that questioning are still wearing the most basic of surgical masks, which don't guard well against the aerosol spread of COVID-19.
Can't have that. Can't have that. We need full body protection.
Under the cover of darkness, an urgent mission to bring infected people to safety. Health teams don COVID swabs and heavy PPE. A long and difficult night ahead to find out how far the virus has spread.
They're working extremely hard, and particularly last night there was a dedicated team who have been continuously working for several days.
9 cases of COVID have been confirmed in Binjari across multiple households, including a 78-year-old woman battling serious infection in hospital. For the community of just 230, a worst fear is being realised. Too upset to talk, Deb Aloisi from the local Aboriginal Corporation told the ABC via text a worst
Can we just
fear
stop
is
here for a second and look at that? Look at that. That's the threat to the whole continent right there. That little thing. That's the threat to the whole continent. That's why we need isolation. It is an isolation camp.
Realised. Too upset to talk, Deb Aloisi from the local Aboriginal Corporation told the ABC via text message, "They are so scared out there, ringing me and crying. It's just heartbreaking. I've worked with these people for 4 generations and they're family to me." Making matters worse, people move regularly between Binjari and the nearby community of Rockhole. The government fears that means more cases are all but inevitable.
We do expect the numbers in Binjari and probably Rockhole to increase, and they may increase by a lot.
Well, now there's the most popular man in the world right now. I won't say too much about him, but here's a little look at life in the camps.
It's perhaps the biggest quarantine in human history. Millions of people are in a state of lockdown in China. However, even outside mainland China, there are thousands of people worldwide who've been quarantined after being evacuated from Wuhan, the epicenter of the outbreak. Let's now take a look as to what life is like inside quarantine camps from Serbia to Australia to the United States.
The coronavirus outbreak has pushed thousands of people in quarantine across the globe. This is a camp in Siberia. Scores of Russians are being kept here. In the best-case scenario, they'll be allowed to leave in 2 weeks. Vladimir Markov is here after spending 3 months in Wuhan. The Russian government evacuated him.
Okay, we are finally in a hospital. Now what do we have to do? We have to put our old clothes in one bag. This is top clothes. Another clothes in another bag. And then call to reception. They will come and take all clothes for disinfection. Also, we had to use alcohol and clean all personal belongings. That's it. Let's do it.
Russia shares a 4,300-kilometer long border with China. It was sealed after 2 cases of the coronavirus were confirmed, both Chinese nationals. Wang Yunbin was one of them. He did not know he was infected.
The hospital didn't tell me at first because they might have been worried that we would refuse to be quarantined in the hospital or refuse medical treatment. Or they were worried I might overreact to the news. They might have planned to tell my family first and then me.
30-year-old Wan reveals how he feared for his life.
This is the first time in my 30-year life that I'm thinking about death, because death cases are being reported every day in China. Later I told myself it was just a cold, only a more severe and a new kind of cold.
Death cases are being reported now. See, this is the first time in history that we've reported all death cases.
And no drugs had yet been found that will cure this cold. If we can overcome the common cold, we will be able to overcome this new cold. Then I will be fine.
Strict protocol is in place to protect others also housed in the quarantine facility.
Everything is brought into the rooms and contact between people is completely forbidden. So if you're in the room with someone else, you've got to stay in that room for 2 weeks. Otherwise, if you break the rules, the quarantine is extended. In other words, it's launched anew, another 14 days on top of that.
300 people are being kept under observation in this detention centre on Christmas Island off the northwestern coast of Australia. Evacuees say they are glad to be on home soil.
They're doing a fantastic job. From the moment that we left Wuhan to the time that we've had here.
Oh, it's sad. They're doing a fantastic job of keeping us in jail. Okay, welcome everybody to AoT Live, number 148. Yeah, 148. Global nanny state, tyranny, atheism's logical progression. That's what this is when you look at it. How did we get here? I want to talk to you a little bit about how we got here today and give you some examples of what it looks like when we've rejected all sense. All common sense is out the window. So let's get started here today. I've got an article here from Zero Hedge. Here you go. It says the Australian Army has begun to transfer positive cases, contacts to quarantine camps. Australian Army has begun forcibly removing residents in the Northern Territories to the Howard Springs camp, which we just saw a moment ago. After nine new cases in the community of Binjari. The move comes after hard lockdowns were instituted in the communities of both Binjari and nearby Rockhole on Saturday night. We heard this earlier. The residents no longer have the 5 reasons to leave their homes. Right? No, it's not allowed, said NT Chief Minister Michael Gunner, referring to the country's 5 allowable reasons to avoid lockdown, which were buying food and supplies, exercising for up to 2 hours, care or caregiving, work or education if it can't be done from home, and, of course, you can leave to get vaccinated at the nearest possible location. Now they can only leave for medical treatment in an emergency or as required by law. It's highly likely that more residents will be transferred to the facility, either as positive cases or as close contacts. So you don't have to be a positive case to get transferred. We have already identified 38 close contacts from Binjari, but that number will go up. Those 38 are being transferred now. Quote, I contacted the Prime Minister last night. We were grateful for the support of about 20 ADF personnel, that's your military, as well as Army trucks to assist with the transfer of positive cases and close contacts and to support the communities. We're doing an assessment today of what extra resources we might need from the feds, and the Prime Minister's ready to help further. I thank him for that, unquote. So you can see what's happening here. This is... says in 2018 and 2019 from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, almost 1 in 5 Indigenous Australians lived in overcrowded dwellings. Now here is part of the narrative I wanted you to see about. Overcrowded dwellings. It seems like we're starting there. Wherever we can pinpoint there's an overcrowded situation, we'll start there. All right. So in addition, the more remote an area, the higher the proportion of Indigenous Australians living in overcrowded dwellings. 26% in remote areas and 51% in very remote areas, compared to 8 and 22% in non-remote areas. They say if we could get the housing in there right now, I would be pushing that straight away to the federal government and the NT government to work on that. But we obviously need the resources to do that. So for now, this is how we have to battle it. There were 0 new cases reported on Sunday. However, Minister Gunner said he was worried about mingling between households. Right. In Binjari and Rockall, whose populations are around 220 to 130 respectively. When asked, he said, yes, these are strong measures, but the threat to lives is extreme. And how can you argue with that? Right? It's the threat to life. Here's more tweets about the camps being used now in Australia, and as you saw clearly all over the world. Australia, the Army is now transferring positive cases in the Northern Territories by Army truck. So, for those of you who are out there who might come across this video and you think, oh, it's just tinfoil hatters. Here we go. Look, it's the Q crowd again. No, folks, you're not paying attention. You've swallowed some kind of lie. Here also from Kenya. Little trip around the world. Kenya stepping up calls for people to get the jab, saying that from 21st of December, anyone who's not will be denied access to government services. And I assume that would mean any kind of relief support or whatever. You're just out of luck at that point. It says that 10%, only 10% of Kenyans have been jabbed so far, are inoculated. Let's say it that way. Inoculated with what? We're not really sure. But also, South Africa. We've done our show, our Tracking Dystopia show with our contact in South Africa. And Summer spoke with him recently, and he mentioned that in South Africa, when you're in the affluent areas, most of the people are vaccinated. That seems to be the case. However, when you get out into the so-called poor areas, they call them the ghettos, almost nobody is inoculated. And those people in those areas express a strong resistance and suspicion regarding the nature of the whole rollout. Now, isn't that interesting? The people who likely don't have access to widespread media seem to be resistant and suspicious. The people who are well plugged into the internet and media, going right along with it. What do you think that is? Is it a lack of information? Are the people in the ghettos, are they missing out on valuable information? Or is this a massive propaganda move? You can decide for yourself. Also, not sure what to make of it just yet, but in reports from Botswana, that United Nations troops we can't verify this anyway so far yet, but just letting you know that word is out there, that UN troops have gathered outside or near Botswana, looking like they're gearing up for something. This comes after last week or a couple weeks ago, Botswana signed on to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals policy. That's just a story out there right now. We don't know what to do with that just yet, but we'll keep you updated. And Austria, out of Austria. Austria is Europe's first country to demand the jab for all. This story is out of Berlin, actually. Austria on Friday became the first country in Europe to say it will mandate the jab for everyone eligible. And that is everyone. As it reimposed a nationwide lockdown amid a surge in infections that has gripped parts of Europe. Surging cases. That's what we're hearing, right? Lots of cases. Is anybody sick? Can't really talk about it any more than that over here. So we invite you. Join us over at armoroftruth.net. That's where we have our independent platform. But it says Austria's announcement comes as countries across Europe grapple with how to deal with rising cases as winter sets in. The World Health Organization said Tuesday that Europe was the world's only region with deaths on the rise. The only region in the world. Deaths on the rise. Jumping by 5% since earlier this month. So Austria, the first to demand. And there's also, because of this, there are obviously protests. Protesters rallying against new restrictions and against the passports that are being required, that are mandatory in many European countries. Demonstrators. Tens of thousands of protesters. Did you hear about this anywhere? Fox News, CNN give you this? Many from far-right groups. There you go. There's the narrative. They're from far-right groups. Anyone, obviously, right? Obviously, anybody who is protesting a government overreach has to be a far-right group. That's the narrative, right? If it happens in the United States, well, you're a Trump supporter. That's how it is. It's black or it's white. And this is also, as they say, due to skyrocketing infections. Demonstration against restrictions took place in Switzerland, Croatia, Italy, Northern Ireland, and the Netherlands on Saturday, a day after Dutch police opened fire on protesters and 7 people were injured in rioting that erupted in Rotterdam. It's heating up a little bit. So there's that. Let's look at our poll question. I've got a poll question for you today. Can't really see that, can you? There we go. The poll question today is this. Which state will have the first... disappeared, didn't it? Which state will have the first live quarantine camp in the United States? Which U.S. state will host the first live quarantine camp? And by live, we mean so-called positive cases. Well, so far, I've given you California, Wyoming, Oregon, and Alabama, and there's a reason why I chose those states. It's because of the region they're in. So I gave you these 5 options, 4 states, and one you can write in your own idea, your own location, your own prediction. So far, though, 3/4 of you have said it's definitely going to be California. Well, let's look at what the comments say. Vic P says, I'm surprised I didn't see New York in there. I had New York in there. However, there is a region near New York that looks like it might catch all those people. I'll show you these regions in just a moment. So that's a good point, Vic. Brian Brown says, I've been wondering if the main reasons for the shortages have to do with clearing out the Walmarts for that purpose. Of course, we remember the old Jade Helm operation back in 2015. Now, that's for you serious red pillars out there. Guys, those of you who've been around for a while. He says, I know Sam Walton was in charge of the camps during his life, so it would make sense to me. Yeah, it's all happening, isn't it? Crystal says, my first thought was New York. I hope not Oregon, but it's pretty split here. And I gave Oregon as a possibility for that reason, too. We'll show you in just a minute. I went grocery shopping last night after midnight and was able to go maskless. From what I now where we live here in North Carolina, we never wear them unless we're going in a medical place where it's just crazy. It says, from what I understand, every state in the U.S. except 2 has 3 quarantine, aka camps, concentration camps, throughout the state. I don't remember which 2. This was over a year ago and I read about it. Such insanity. B says, I'm torn between Washington State and Texas. Now, Washington State is a pretty good guess. You'll see why. To my knowledge, there is no camp in Oregon. Washington State is Region X, Region 10, and handles Washington, Oregon, Idaho. I suppose it will depend on which camps are the most equipped and ready. I don't know. Washington State has been hiring. There you go. Trying to make sense of it all. Says, yep, I'm in. Gets the state I'm in gets most votes. California, right? All right. One Hope for Heaven says, I figure it will start somewhere on the East Coast first, perhaps New York. Kelly Henson says, no idea. Maybe California, only because of the leadership or lack thereof. Plus, they're very liberal. But states with wide open places, lots of land, would also be a guess. Other than that, I have zero idea. Much love to the family. Sarah Khanna says, my state, Colorado, might be first. They were the first to do many stupid things in the past. Cameron Helterbrand says, probably not Alaska. Julie says, of course it's California. Emilios Man says, probably my garbage state, Illinois. All right, so if you'd like to join in and give us your 2 cents, the link to the poll question is pinned to the top of the live chat, or you can just navigate over to the community section on the Brad from Carolina YouTube channel while we're still here. See if anybody else dropped in. Yeah, here's a couple. Roik X says, Hawaii, big oof. Fearfully and Wonderfully Made says, I say New York. Be Saved by Grace says, no camps anywhere, just part of the fear campaign. Interesting. Saved by Grace. That is an excellent segue. Thank you for that, Be Saved by Grace, who says there are no camps anywhere. Part of the fear campaign. Well, let's just take a look at that. FEMA has the country divided into 10 regions. Federal Emergency Management Agency consists of 10 regions. Now, it doesn't mean anything that there are regions. We're just telling you that there they are. They have it divided into regions for a purpose. There's for a reason, of course. But FEMA camps are not a conspiracy theory. They're not a figment of imagination. They're not part of a fear campaign. They exist. And here is a picture. Here's Google Maps, FEMA camp locations, which is available on Google Maps. You can look at it for yourself. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean these are quarantine camps. I'm not saying that. I'm saying here are camps designated as FEMA camps for the purpose of some type of catastrophe where people could be taken to, let's just call it safety. All right? It's for your best. It's in your best interest. It's there to it's for your best. Okay? Of course, if we have leadership who have taken on absolute authority themselves as God, well, then these camps could be used for just about anything, couldn't they? Let's talk about this for a minute. So just to settle that dispute there, FEMA camps are not, they're not part of a fear campaign. They exist. Now, I'm sure if, there is a fear campaign. There's no question about that. But that's to get people to comply with a particular narrative. And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, what is it? Well, it could be considered a secret government, although it's not that secret. Right? This agency has powers and authority that go well beyond any other agency in the nation. What can FEMA do? Well, it can suspend laws. It can move entire populations. It can arrest and detain citizens without a warrant and can hold them without a trial, and has done so. It can seize property, can seize food supplies, can take charge and commandeer transportation systems. It can even suspend the Constitution of the United States. In its original iteration, the original idea, when it was first presented, its original mission was to assure the survivability of the United States government in the event of a nuclear attack. All right. Its secondary function was to be a federal coordinating body during times of domestic disasters. These disasters consisted of earthquakes, floods, and hurricanes. But, anything that's deemed a disaster, all the leaders have to do is stamp emergency on a document, and we have a new law. Or we have a new policy, a new rule, they would say it. That's how they would say it. A series of executive orders was used to create the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It doesn't matter whether an executive order is constitutional or not. It becomes a law simply by being published in the Federal Registry. These orders circumvent Congress. There are over 800 of these camps, in the U.S., all fully operational and ready to receive citizens. They are all staffed and even surrounded by guards. But at the moment, they're empty for the most part, I guess. And the idea is they will be operated by FEMA. Should martial law need to be implemented in the United States, and all it would take is a presidential signature on a proclamation and the Attorney General's signature on a warrant to which a list of names is attached, and then you can be taken. Ask yourself if you really want to be on one of these lists. Something called the Rex 84 program was established on the reasoning that if a mass exodus of illegal aliens crossed the U.S.-Mexican border, that they would be quickly rounded up and detained in detention centers by FEMA. Rex 84 allowed many military bases to be closed down and be turned into facilities, we'll call them. Could call them prisons. We'll call them facilities because we're on YouTube. Operation Cable Splicer and Garden Plot are two sub-programs which will be implemented once the Rex 84 program is initiated for its proper purpose. Have you heard anything about people coming across the southern border lately? Garden Plot is the program to control the population. Cable Splicer is the program for an orderly takeover of the state and local governments by the federal government. Now, these are we're speculating on those two. But FEMA is the executive arm of the coming, we could call it the coming police state. Presidential executive orders already listed on the Federal Register are also a part of the legal framework for this operation. All of these locations have railroad facilities, as well as roads leading to and from the detention facilities. Many also have an airport nearby. The majority of the camps can house a population of up to 20,000. Currently, the largest of these facilities is just outside of Fairbanks, Alaska. Sorry about that, Cameron. The Alaskan facility is a massive mental health facility and can hold approximately 2 million people. Now, I'm sharing this with you from an article from News Punch. That's speculative right there. That one's speculative right there. But what is not speculative? These executive orders associated with FEMA that could suspend the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, these executive orders have been on record for nearly 30 years. Could be enacted by the stroke of a pen, a presidential pen. Who's sitting in the White House right now? Allows Executive 10990 allows the government to take over all modes of transportation and control of highways and seaports. Executive Order 10995 allows the government to seize and control the communication media. EO 10997 allows the government to take over all electrical power, gas, petroleum, fuels, and minerals. Executive Order 10998 allows the government to seize all means of transportation, including personal cars, trucks, vehicles of any kind, and total control over all highways, seaports, and waterways. Executive Order 10999 allows the government to take over all food resources and farms. Executive Order 11,000 allows the government to mobilize civilians into work brigades under government supervision. Executive Order 11001 allows the government to take over all health, education, and welfare functions. Executive Order 11002 designates the Postmaster General to operate a national registration of all persons, which already exists, right? You got an address. Executive Order 11003 allows the government to take over all airports and aircraft, including commercial aircraft, and on and on. Executive Order 11004 allows the Housing and Finance Authority to relocate communities, build new housing with public funds, designate areas to be abandoned, and establish new locations for populations. Executive Order 11005 allows the government to take over railroads, inland waterways, and public storage facilities. 11051 specifies the responsibility of the Office of Emergency Planning and gives authorization to put all executive orders into effect in times of increased international tensions and economic or financial crisis, which can certainly be created very easily these days. Executive Order 11310 grants authority to the Department of Justice to enforce the plans set out in executive orders, to institute industrial support, to establish judicial, legislative liaison, and on and on and on. So you get down to the National Security Act of 1947, which is where this seems to have begun, allows for the strategic relocation of industries, services, government, and other essential economic activities, and to rationalize the requirements for manpower, resources, and production facilities. 1950, Defense Production Act was put into place in 2020 as a response to pandemic. Gives the president sweeping powers over all aspects of the economy. International Emergency Economic Powers Act enables the president to seize the property of a foreign country or national. These powers were transferred to FEMA in a sweeping consolidation back in 1979. President Reagan, this is bipartisan, so don't worry about your political paradigm here. This is bipartisan. They're all happy. They're all compelled to work for this. President Reagan signed the Presidential Director number 54 in April of 1984 that allowed FEMA to activate a secret national readiness exercise. This exercise was given the code name Rex 84, which you just talked about. The purpose of the exercise was to test FEMA's ability to assume military authority. What are some of the things it could do? Suspension of the Constitution of the United States, turning control of the government over to FEMA, appointment of military commanders to run the state and local governments, declaration of martial law. Now, that's just a little bit. I'm not trying to scare anybody. We're not trying to fearmonger here. What we expect as Christians, we understand who has absolute authority. Now, under a government that is not derelict of its duty, like ones we see today, we would expect our leaders to react to a time of disaster or catastrophe, even something that even a pandemic. We would expect them to respond on our behalf, in our best interest. But it's up to us to determine whether or not they're telling us the truth about said catastrophe, said disaster, or said pandemic. And the more of us who are fast asleep and not paying attention to where our liberties are at the moment, the faster this moves ahead. So I wanted to share that with you to get started today because I want us to understand how we got here and what is the answer. And I think you probably know where I'm headed with that. Now, I've got some more stuff for you about Romanism as a world power. What is the Pope up to today, these days? Is he in control of things? This also this is the update on the Club of Rome's work back in 1972, the Limits to Growth paper, book that was published in 1972. I'll be sharing a little bit of this from the global forecast for the next 40 years. It's a think tank. What do the people who have power think is going to happen? Right here. I'll share a little bit of that with you in just a bit. But let me share this with you right now. How did we get here? Why am I bringing this stuff up today? What, have you just gone completely red-pilled conspiracy theory? No. Pay attention. Atheism, apathy, and subjective spirituality. We'll just call that New Age movement. All of these things have brought the world to the brink of a global totalitarian system. In the alternative media, or bloggers, or if you want to call them truthers, we often hear a correct diagnosis of where we are in the process, but what we need to know is how we got here, so we can correctly identify the problem and prayerfully and aggressively find our way out of the clutches of these power-hungry technocrats. There is no transcendent truth in a totalitarian regime. That is the first thing that must go if an authoritarian wants to take control. People can't have access to the truth. or truth is always changing. The goalposts are always moving. Today, all over the world, we see the result of this. We see what happens when masses reject God, embrace human achievement, seek subjective forms of spirituality in New Age movements, and worst of all, when masses assign absolute power to their governments. Now, recently, Richard Dawkins was on Joe Rogan, and so this is the attitude, right? A lot of people have today, even people who are not atheists, still have this sort of attitude. It's become very popular today. So I'm going to play a couple clips here from Richard Dawkins talking with Joe Rogan.
It'll come soon.
Hang on there, Richard. And then we're going to analyze what he has to say, because this is the mindset that is taken over. Don't necessarily have to be an atheist. It's just this is the idea that's out there. Relativism. There is no absolute truth. What does that lead to? It leads to where we are, facing down a totalitarian gun barrel. So let's get a couple of these clips here. Here's just get you a couple. Let me speed it up just a little bit. So there we go. All right, let's listen to the first clip here. Are people less religious today, and is that a good thing?
It'll come soon, but I do, and I look forward to that time, of course. I think we're moving in the right direction, and the figures bear that out. Even in America, which is off the scale of Western civilizations, even in America, the number of people who now subscribe to a religion is dropping dramatically, and the number who say they have no religion is now about 25%. That's a lot. That's a great deal. And that compares to any one particular Christian denomination. And yet, politically, that group, the nuns, the no beliefs, have no lobby. They have no powerful pressure group. So politicians will go out there and suck up to, the Irish lobby, the Polish lobby, the Jewish lobby, the Catholic lobby, etc. But the atheist lobby hasn't got his act together, or is only just now beginning to get his act together.
Well, all right, so there's a claim. Religion is dying, and Richard's happy. He's happy about that. All right. Are people less religious today? I would suggest to you that the decline in adherence to biblical Christianity has not been a good thing for the U.S. or the world. But here Dawkins said that there are some who consider themselves nuns, right? He said people with no beliefs. There's not a person on the planet with no beliefs. All right, so, but he's saying these nuns, these are the people who claim they have no religion. I object, Sir Dawkins. Everyone has a religion. Richard Dawkins is espousing his religion right here. You're either worshiping something outside yourself or you're worshiping yourself, but nobody is religionless. All right, nobody is religionless. And we're going to see more about why these claims are silly as we move forward here. Here's another few seconds of a clip here. Do you have to believe in a higher power to be moral? Right? That's why I'm talking about this today. How have we ended up here in this situation where seems like the masses in the world can just be moved back and moved around pretty easily with fear? Let's see what this is.
One of the things that you brought up in the God Delusion was the willingness of people to vote for a gay candidate for president, a black candidate for president, a woman candidate for president, but then an atheist, which is, I believe, 40%.
They think that you've got to have a belief in some kind of higher power in order to be moral. But the weird thing is that it doesn't have to be the same higher power as the one you believe in. Anyone will do, right, as long as there is one. But if you don't believe in a higher power, you must be immoral.
Wrong. Just flat wrong. Richard Dawkins is not much of a philosopher. All right, he might be a great geneticist or scientist, but he's not much of a philosopher. Christians do not believe that atheists cannot be moral. That's never been the claim. We're saying that you cannot ground your morality in anything objective without a transcendent authority. Therefore, then your morality is constantly up for grabs, and you can see we might get something like we have here today, where totalitarians or authoritarians, globalists have everybody at their whim right now. Because if you have no transcendent authority, a rule that never changes, well, then your rules are constantly up for grabs. Your rules, your truth can change at any moment if the right personal circumstances or political pressure happens to come along. The reason it is important for leaders to follow the law of God. Now, he's mentioned here too, you know, they won't elect someone who doesn't recognize a God, you know. Well, yeah, there's a good reason for that. The reason it's important for leaders to follow the law of God is precisely for the reason that we're seeing occur today. We don't want those leaders thinking that they can take the place of God and act with absolute authority, like we're seeing today. If people understood the law of God, if they hadn't rejected it here in the United States, in post-Christianity, well, it might not be so easy to push us around. So I hope Richard here and Joe are very happy with their flawed secularist paradigm, because we now see the results of their way of thinking. So you atheists out there who might come across this, it doesn't happen very often. But if you do, don't bother with leaving a comment below that Joe Biden is a Christian or that Kamala Harris is a Christian Buddhist or whatever. It's more than obvious who their God is. Their God is power. Their God is mammon, and they serve it. Now, we move ahead here. Where do we get our morals from?
Extract this concept of a higher power. Let's get rid of it. Let's get rid of it. Where do you think people get their morals and their ethics from?
Now, that's a profoundly difficult question. We clearly don't get them.
Okay, he says it's a very difficult question to ask. Up to this point, Richard Dawkins has spoken as though it's very easy to understand morals. He's changed his tune now.
From religion. And yet we get them from somewhere, and you can demonstrate that by the fact that
we get our morals from somewhere. Okay, where?
The moral values of any particular century are markedly different from those of other centuries, even decades. So in the 21st century, we here now have moral values which are really significantly different from 100 years ago, or 200 years ago, or 300 years ago.
Okay, so there's a claim. Morality today is so much different than it was 300 years ago. Okay, what does that tell us? Well, Dawkins here says it's a profound question. Where do morals come from? He says that the moral values of one century are markedly different from other centuries. Of course they are. That's not a very helpful statement. But why are they different from century to century? It's because we live in a fallen creation where God has been rejected. All right, so Dawkins is absolutely right. The morals of the next century after this one could be entirely different from this one. And the path we're on now, the clips I've just showed you at the beginning of this, where people are all too happy to willingly walk into a camp where the fences, where the barbed wire is pointed inwards to keep you inside. The path we're on now, we could easily see slavery perhaps reinstituted globally under the cause of safety. Of course, Dawkins, according to Dawkins and Rogan here, and millions of others, they would say, hey, we're making great progress, right? We're progressing. We're very progressive with our technology and our big brains. Look how much we're progressing. Yeah, we're barreling down the highway at the speed of technocracy with our lights out, Klaus Schwab at the wheel, and we're really getting there fast, right? We're blinded by relativism, but we're really making good progress. So let's move ahead here to this section. Morals, where they finally come to a decision where morals come from. Listen to this.
Well, something is changing as the centuries go by. In Outgrowing God, I call it something in the air, which of course doesn't explain anything. But what I mean by that is that it's not literally hovering in the air, but it's a collection of conversations between people.
I think Richard might be a Jungian, right? He's talking about a collective conscience here. It sounds like
party conversations, parliamentary decisions.
Let me rewind that because you got to hear that. You got to hear that again.
Collection.
Where do morals come from?
What I mean by that is that it's not literally hovering in the air, but it's a collection of conversations between people, dinner party conversations, parliamentary decisions, congressional...
Morals come from conversations.
Debates, judicial...
Morals come from debates.
Decisions.
Morals come from judicial decisions. When men make laws, we get morals from that. Really?
By judges, juries, newspaper articles, journalism.
Whoa, there you go. Morality comes from newspaper articles.
All these things together conspire together to produce something in the air, something that defines a given century or maybe even a given decade.
And there you go, folks. Richard Dawkins, let's all give him a hand. He has determined where morals come from, and that's a bunch of gobbledygook. So, and Rogan goes on to support what he's saying here by saying something like, look, we have all these YouTube videos now. We can watch all these YouTube videos, and we have, as Dawkins would point out, we have dinner parties where elites get together and they talk about things, and that's where morals come from. So morals come from YouTube videos and discussions and conversations had at elite dinner parties. That's our answer. That's what's going to pull us out of this mess. Dawkins and Rogan, both of them, know very well where morals come from. Morals come from the Creator. These men have just confused themselves. They think they're the Creator. As long as we are led by men like this, who think this way or even worse, at least they're consistent. All right. If we're led by people who pretend to be faithful to God but act in clear contradiction, then we're going to continue to experience this fall into immorality and a new slavery. After all, Dawkins said morals change from century to century, right? So it's no big deal, right? It's very easy for Dawkins to say these things because he won't be alive in the next century to see how things have changed. But he thinks we're on the right track with less religious people around. What do you think? You think we're on the right track? For these atheistic materialists, secularists, the end of Darwin's reign means transhumanism. It means evolving ourselves within these relativistic worldviews. But there is always a worldview in play, and thus a standard. Yes, there's always a religion at play. Dawkins is telling you his religion. His religion is human achievement, just to make it clear. Richard Dawkins, his religion, his deity is human achievement. The only question about the standard that we're going to operate under, will it be man-made and ever-changing, or will it be transcendent, never-changing authority? So when the secularist says, no, Christian, you can't use your Bible to make truth claims about morality, I say, why not? Every time Richard Dawkins appeals to reason, every time Joe Rogan appeals to DMT for truth, they're using their Bible. The glaring difference is that their Bible, Richard Dawkins' Bible, human achievement, same Bible that Joe Rogan has. Well, the faith of human achievement is circumstantially pragmatic. That means it's ever-changing. A constantly changing standard is no standard at all. We're going to live under a totalitarian system. That's not up for grabs. The question that you have to ask yourself is, who is your sovereign? Who is your authority? Are you going to have faith in flawed mankind with his puny 2-kilo brain, with all the knowledge of this little blue speck in the blackness of space? Or are you going to have your faith in the eternally stable, all good creator of the universe and all that's in it, with exhaustive knowledge of every molecule? As R.C. Sproul put it, there is no maverick molecule with our God. Yeah, that's the place to put your faith. So just think of that for a minute. Think of that image. Would you rather have your faith in man, who knows just enough to get himself into all kinds of trouble, or in God, the one who created man and the universe and all that's in it? We used to have that priority. Our universities once were established under that priority, with theology as the master discipline, and all studies flowed from the knowledge of the Creator. But today, now we have anthropology at the top position, and then studies of religions come in somewhere 3 buildings down over behind the freshman dorm. So in that sense, we deserve what we get. Meanwhile, the world's elite, while these guys are having conversations about morality coming from YouTube videos, meanwhile, the world's elite are marching full steam ahead in all arrogance toward a transhumanist future and, of course, global totalitarianism. The political philosophy of the day, which is Agenda 21, it is the climate and health tyranny, which at its core assumes that man is both not good and God at the same time. Those with the reins of power are the ones who are good, while the rest of the unwashed masses must be poked, prodded, assimilated, and ultimately simulated in a virtual grid of ultimate slavery. The kind of slavery, as Aldous Huxley predicted, where man will love his servitude. His prediction is that we will all love our slavery. We will all be so happy to be isolated from the rest in camps. I didn't see anyone complaining too much, did you? I saw one person trying to get away. That's going to pick up a little bit as time moves forward. But these people in power right now have taken that power from a once responsible free people who now have clearly fallen asleep at the wheel. Now, because we have forgotten or we have suppressed truth, Romans chapter 1 explains it. Everyone knows God exists. Those who say they don't have suppressed the truth in unrighteousness. But because we've suppressed it, and we don't know our true condition and exactly who really is the Savior, well, we have forfeited the right to govern ourselves, and now we see it come into fruition everywhere as the world hands absolute authority to the adversary, who has replaced God by making men like Richard Dawkins famous, by making men like Joe Rogan famous, men who tell us that God is just a delusion. It's irrational. What could be more of a delusion than to think that finite man could have absolute authority? But here we are. It's on us. I've got a couple pieces to share with you today. I want to share, I told you I would share this with you in a bit. 2052, book by Jorgen Ronders, a report to the Club of Rome, commemorating the 40th anniversary of the Limits to Growth. I shared at the end of a stream last week, if you want to see more about that, I shared a link. I shared a trailer for a documentary. You can look it up here on YouTube. You can do Limits to Growth, and you can find some documentaries that explain just what they were doing in 1972. The idea was this: we can't always be expanding, and they're right about that. But what is their answer to that? We can't always be expanding our economies. We'll run out of resources for sure if we keep doing that. You'll have to start printing money, and the money will lose its value. So they're thinking about how do we address that. But they're thinking about how to address that from a secular worldview, from a secular perspective. Now, in this book, in 2052 here, the global forecast for the next 40 years, listen to what it says here about the armed forces fighting new threats. They say this: another aspect worth mentioning is the changing role of the military over the next 40 years. The military will not disappear, but will fight new enemies. The real threat to a nation will increasingly be extreme weather and the resulting damage, and in some places a potential flood of climate refugees. Is that what the camps are for? Military man and machine power will increasingly be used to clean up the mess after hurricanes and to bring in emergency rations when drought strikes. The military will help keep borders closed. Real combat will increasingly be the task of robots and drones. Interesting, right? Not just that. Then we can get into, I'll give you a report here one of these days pretty soon about the future of war and the rise of robots. You can see a video like that over at armortruth.net, our very first live uncensored show over there. AoT True Normal Show number 1. We dealt specifically with that issue. But what about disease? What about disease in the future? Where we are now in the future. 2052. That's just around the corner now. It says here, if a deadly disease were to solve the climate problem, remember you heard that, didn't you? Remember that in the news back in 2020? It's amazing. Everyone staying at home seems to have been a benefit to the climate. But is that real? Anyway, if a deadly disease were to solve the climate problem, it would have to reduce emissions from 2010 to 2050 by about 1/3 relative to a previous forecast. Now listen to this. In broad terms, this would result if energy use was reduced by 1/3. Keep that number in mind. Reduced by 1/3, which in turn would result if the economy was reduced by 1/3, which would result if the population was reduced by 1/3. In other words, the climate problem would be solved if some kind of pest or pandemic killed some 2 billion people. At this time, it's 1/3 of the global population. And the die-off was evenly distributed among age groups and regions. Wow. I wonder how you could make that happen. Hint, hint. He says, I can't imagine anything like this could ever happen. Oh, really? And certainly hope not. I don't believe you. Anyway, he finishes up and says this. But on the other hand, the bubonic plague in the years around 1350 killed that same fraction of European populations, 1/3. It was a plague that took out 1/3 of the population. A pest today killing 2 billion people would be both a disaster beyond comprehension and a solution to the climate problem. That's from the think tank, one of the think tanks that advises these people who pull the strings. Speaking of people who pull the strings, let's deal with who is in charge. There you go. I have some quotes for you from this book by Luther S. Kaufman. This book is copyright 1922. Well, not this one. This is a copy. But Romanism as a World Power. What do we find in here? Now, this book is a gem. It is a jewel. And here are some of the things we find in here. An extract from a sermon by Roman Catholic priest and editor D.S. Phelan of St. Louis, Missouri, printed in his paper called The Western Watchman, June 27, 1912. Says this, why is it that in this country where we have only 7% of the population, the Catholic Church is so much feared? She is loved by all her children and feared by everybody. Why is it the Pope has such tremendous power? Because the Pope is the ruler of the world. All the emperors, all the kings, all the princes, all the presidents of the world are as these altar boys of mine. Interesting, right? What does the Pope think about it? We now have our first Jesuit Pope. What is relevant about that, right? Are you just being a conspiracy theorist, Brad? Well, the following is a part of the Jesuits' oath to the Pope. Now we have a Pope who is a Jesuit. So anyway, let's see what this says. I do denounce and disown any allegiance as due to any heretical king, prince, or state named Protestant, or obedience to any of their inferior magistrates or officers. Now that is from a book called Pope or President, page 237. That's from April 1921, that piece. Let's see what we have here. This is Ferraris on the same page from a Thomas Aquinas. Here's what Thomas Aquinas said. What good Catholic is going to deny what Thomas Aquinas has to say, right? He says, in 1595, he said, the Pope, by divine right, has spiritual, or he says hath, spiritual and temporal power as supreme king of the world, so that he can impose taxes on all Christians and destroy towns and cities for the preservation of Christianity. For the preservation of Christianity? I'll let you decide. But on the same page, you find this quote from Ferraris in his Bibliotheca Prompta, 1763, which is adopted as a standard of Roman Catholic law, says the following. On account of the excellence of his supreme dignity, he is called Bishop of Bishops, Ordinary of Ordinaries, Universal Bishop of the Church, Bishop of the whole world, Divine Monarch, Supreme Emperor, and, here comes the kicker, King of Kings. What does the Pope think about himself? What does he think about his position? Who is God according to the Pope? He is. He is God. And this is what we've done. This is what we've done to ourselves. We've given absolute authority to the men of the world. Vicar General Preston, in a sermon in New York on January 1st, 1888, every word that Leo, this is Pope Leo, speaks from his high chair is the voice of the Holy Ghost and must be obeyed. To every Catholic heart comes no thought but obedience. I would remind you, as I pause in the middle of this one, where do our presidents go immediately upon being elected, or very shortly thereafter? They go to meet with the Pope. They kiss his ring. I'm not telling you exactly what that means because I don't really know. But as the Pope goes around the world now, pulling everyone together on the issue of climate change and saying that the pagans in South America are just as much in the body of Christ as anyone else, we need to pay attention. We need to pay close attention to this. To every Catholic heart comes no thought but obedience. It is said that politics is not within the province of the church and that the church has jurisdiction only in matters of faith. You say, I will receive my faith from the pontiff, but I will not receive my politics from him. The assertion is disloyal and untruthful. You must not think as you choose. You must think as Catholics. The man who says, I will take my faith from Peter, but I will not take my politics from Peter, is not a good Catholic. Interesting, huh? So the point here is, I'll give you in this book the final appeal here from Luther Kaufman. He says, so as best I could, I have tried to show you the responsibility which you and all good citizens bear to the government under which we live, the greatness of the government, and the inestimable rights and privileges guaranteed to us by our institutions, and the efforts being made to destroy these institutions. Institutions whose authority, who put all authority, absolute authority in God, is what he's talking about. I trust I've been able to show you that the greatest enemy to our free institutions today is this foreign government, which under the guise of religion assumes to set up a super government over us and dares to set aside our constitutions and laws. And now, in view of all these facts and the perils to our government and our free institutions, I appeal to you as American citizens, as leaders of thought, as men of God, to become aroused to the dangers of the situation. Pay attention. Wake up and pay attention is what he's saying. I beg of you to go to your various congregations, present to them the facts which I have tried to give you today, urge them to perform their duties as citizens, to the end that we may place in official positions only men who are devoted to God. Let us, in season and out of season, work and talk and act together for the preservation of this great republic, so that this government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the face of the earth. Now that's 1922. And still as relevant as ever. So when you couple this with the obvious urge that we see in the world today of the humanists, the humanist urge in the world today to merge man with machine in a new man-driven evolution, well, you get some disturbing possibilities when we see the direction the world is taking. And of course, they march on with power as their preferred deity and science as their gospel, made possible, of course, by God's common grace. They're constantly borrowing from the one true Creator God. These people who seek a transhumanist future, who have some anyway, who have seated science as their God, where did their science come from? In a uniform universe where we can make such accurate observations, yet be so ignorant as to the reason why even something like empiricism today has become an idol. To our atheists and secularist friends, you need to know this. Without a designed uniform universe, you could make no claims about the climate. Without a designed uniform universe, you could make no claims about viruses. You could make no claims about exactly where your missiles are going to come down. For if we could not rely on carbon and hydrogen behaving tomorrow the same way it did today, then you would have no science. Without God and without the direction of the Christian worldview, you'd have no such discipline called science at all. You'd have chaos. And this universe is obviously not chaos. The fact that I can say that to you right now in a language that you can hear and comprehend, and you could say yay or nay, you could agree or disagree back to me, that's all the evidence we need to know that this is not chaos, that this is an orderly, uniform universe, and every scientist knows it's uniform. And because it's uniform and had a beginning, it has a cause. But let's digress from that Kalam cosmological argument, because listen, winning a convert from atheism to deism is really no victory at all. Anthony Flew, which is the common if you're someone who's taken a classical apologetics approach and using natural theology, we always bring up Anthony Flew, who was an atheist scientist most of his life, and then near death, he started to believe that there was a God. He was converted to deism. Well, Anthony Flew was just as lost in deism as he was in atheism. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. He set the earth on its foundation so that it should never be moved. God said, I made the earth and created man on it. It was my hands that stretched out the heavens, and I commanded all their host. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. Now let us not leave this part out. But by the same word, the heavens and earth that now exist are stored up for fire, being kept until the day of judgment and destruction of the ungodly. This world that we exist in right now, this universe, is divinely created, and it is divinely supervised. Choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That is where our absolute authority will be, even unto persecution and to death. Our limitations are not his limitations. We are finite creatures and can know nothing of nature or ourselves. Much less could we forecast the weather without the God who has spoken. He's there, and he is not silent. One of these days, perhaps very soon, everyone's going to know it. Now, as we talk about a little bit about this idea of utopia, that's what we're being sold. All of this is in your best interest, right? It's important that we protect the world from human beings, because we're creating a utopia. And we've given our governmental structures this absolute authority. I want to share a couple words here, well, a little more than a couple. A few words from you from this, titled Mission of God, from Joe Boot, a manifesto of hope for society. You've heard me say it here before. We want to help you have a proper scriptural cultural theology. That means all of Christ for all of life. That's the point. Not just part of the time. We'll check back in on this poll question here in just a second. We've got 99 votes in on the poll question now. Which U.S. state will host the first live quarantine camp? We'll see who we got here. Just a minute. There are few more odious, that means hated, men that emerge from the pages of European history than the first truly modern intellectual, the professional hypocrite Jean-Jacques Rousseau, famed author of The Social Contract. David Hume, who knew him very well, by bitter experience called him a monster who saw himself as the only important being in the universe. Voltaire thought him, quote, a monster of vanity and vileness. That from the man who said he would destroy Christianity with his own pen in 20 years. Diderot, after knowing him for many years, described him as, quote, deceitful, vain as Satan, ungrateful, cruel, hypocritical, and full of malice. He is perhaps most tellingly summed up in the words of the woman who he claimed was his only love, Sophie de Houdetot. I think I said that right. In old age, she said this of him, quote, he was ugly enough to frighten me, and love did not make him more attractive. But he was a pathetic figure, and I treated him with gentleness and kindness. He was an interesting madman, unquote. Following Plato, Rousseau was a utopian dreamer, yet without doubt was a debauched narcissist who, whilst presuming to lecture others on education, family, and state, abandoned all 5 of his only children in infancy to a hospice where they almost certainly died. Yet in many ways, despite his infantile and vile character, his masochism and exhibitionism, his thought paved the way for the French Revolution and influenced the Russian Revolution, as well as playing a real role in inspiring both communist and fascist regimes in the 20th century. He was an intellectual forerunner of Karl Marx and saw in the state the key to utopia. Paul Johnson has written, Rousseau's state is not merely authoritarian, it's also totalitarian, since it orders every aspect of human activity, thought included, under the social contract. The individual was obliged to alienate himself with all his rights to the whole community. In other words, the state. The function of the social contract and the state it brought into being was to make man whole again. Make man one, and you will make him as happy as he can be. You must therefore treat citizens as children and control their upbringing and thoughts, planting the social law in the bottom of their hearts. Then they become social men by their natures and citizens by their inclinations. They will be one. They will be good. They will be happy. And their happiness will be that of the republic. In other words, if I could digress for a moment, they will learn to love their servitude. Continuing, he did not use the word brainwash, but he wrote, those who control a people's opinion control its actions. Such control is established by treating citizens from infancy as children of the state, trained to consider themselves only in their relationship to the body of the state. Right? That's where the absolute authority is. God is the state. He moved the political process to the very center of human existence by making the legislator, who is also a pedagogue, into the new Messiah, by making the lawmaker into the Messiah, capable of solving all human problems by creating new men. When considering this, one immediately recognizes how modern, quote-unquote modern, Rousseau is, and how his utopian thought has so decisively shaped our political and social order. Today, cultural Marxists, who are busy with their ideological subversion and demoralization of the West in the name of social justice, have Rousseau to thank for their core ideas. It is then of tremendous concern when anti-Christian utopianism is imported into the mission theology in the name of the reign or kingdom of God. Here, a socio-political religion replaces Christianity. We've already seen earlier that that social justice is not biblical justice, nor can the utopian state acting as a new Messiah substitute itself for the kingdom of God. When considering the Missio Dei, the mission of God, and the reign of Christ, it is then imperative that Christians understand the difference between utopia and the kingdom of God, lest they be found advancing the cause of other gods and another faith. So the term utopia, this comes from Thomas More and his ideal society. The term utopia really means no place. More, a devout Catholic revered by churchmen and sainted in 1935, was far from biblical in his thinking, a lot like Pope Francis today, Bergoglio. His famous treatise is a plea for the abolition of private property and the establishment of communism. Thomas More's work is anti-Christian and subversive to the church because nature is the measure of reality and virtue. That means man is God, and ultimately demands control by the state, which becomes man's recreator, which becomes man's provider. The state becomes man's preserver. As for all utopians, unity was More's supreme virtue. Unity, right? Have you heard that lately? Unity. Unity under what? Peace comes through the state, the humanly wrought oneness into which man is absorbed. More saw himself as an elite ruler in a new order in which men could be manipulated to remove all social divisions. It's not surprising then that Vladimir Lenin found inspiration in Thomas More's ideas. True Christian orthodoxy cannot produce these kinds of utopian illusions. The Creator, Redeemer God, in His complete Word, has declared the future of His kingdom and rule, established by His will and power. Since God governs history, the Christian, in faith, obedience, and confidence, moves toward God's predestined future. You can check that with Ephesians 1, Proverbs 16. The triune sovereign God who, by His providence and power, sustains all things, is the one in whom the Christian trusts, Bereft of such security, the non-believer must posit an entirely different worldview. Utopianism, which denies God's predestinating purpose, is more than a political idea. It is a philosophy of life, a religious theology. And that's what we're talking about, right? Everyone's got a religion. No one, Richard Dawkins says, well, so many people are non-religious today. Bunk. Everyone's religious. Just who's your God? Man takes the place of the mythical, non-existent God of the Bible in that case. Instead of seeing man's environment as good, though fallen, creation under the providence of God, utopianism perceives man to be in a chaotic universe that perpetually threatens to crush him. The noted British utopian dreamer Julian Huxley encapsulates the modern humanistic temper this way. So far as we can see, the universe rules itself. Even if a God does exist behind or above the universe as we experience it, we can have no knowledge of this power. The actual gods of historical religions are only the personifications of impersonal facts of nature and of facts of our inner mental life. Unquote. Well, he's right about that. The gods of the Greeks and the Romans, they're just amplified humanity, right? They're no gods at all. But in this view, nature is as capricious as the pagan gods of Greco-Roman mythology, or as man's own inner life of evil thoughts. As Thomas Molnar puts it, our vision of the universe inevitably influences our vision of society and hence our organization of society, right? As a man thinks, so he acts. So if the universe is hostile to us, we conceive of society, our little universe, as also hostile. Having jettisoned the God of the Bible, utopians are confronted by a threatening world of flux. They see no God to give purpose, direction, or rationality to life. This world of chaos in which man's freedom runs wild jeopardizes its own existence by its unpredictability. Man lives in terror, a victim of fate and full of self-pity. Man, in a world without God, has an insatiable desire for control. Rooted in the hope that man can be liberated from unpredictability into the true freedom of necessity. As J.B.S. Haldane, a Marxist utopian, said it, quote, "There is no supernatural and nothing metaphysical. Freedom is the recognition of necessity. That is a paradox, but a truth," unquote. But when man frees himself from the sovereignty of God, he discovers a serious problem. Absolute autonomy, self-law, leads logically to total anarchy of thought and to social chaos. To avoid this disaster, the individual is inevitably plunged into a collectivity that will assume the role of God in creating, predestinating, saving, guiding, and providing for the newly, quote-unquote, liberated man. The new man-God is the collective agency for organizing man's liberty and salvation. This collective divinity is a Nebuchadnezzar-sized idol that steadily lays claim to all the attributes of the God it has replaced. The utopian, the one devoted to utopia, may not seem religious, Richard Dawkins, may not seem religious, since he rarely mentions God, judgment, salvation, heaven, or hell, but he constantly formulates new doctrine, ceremonies, and sacrifices. Huxley, once again, the key writer of UNESCO's founding framework document, says it explicitly. If we translate salvation into terms of this world, we find that it means achieving harmony between different parts of our nature, including its subconscious depths and its rarely touched heights, and also achieving some satisfactory relation of adjustment between ourselves and the outer world, including not only the world of nature, but the social world of man. He says, I believe it to be possible to achieve salvation in this sense and right to aim at doing so, just as I believe it possible and valuable to achieve a sense of union with something bigger than our ordinary selves, even if that something be not a God, but an extension of our narrow core to include a single grasp ranges of outer experience and inner nature on which we do not ordinarily draw. Man becomes God. When you seek this utopia that we're being sold today, this globalist utopia, of course, you're blending secular terminology with the language of pagan spirituality. The union with something bigger than the self is the whole, the one, the ideal of man made a God, divinized in and by his unification with himself or nature. How? How can the creation be the creator? Huxley goes on to argue that purpose lies in science, namely the endless possibilities of the evolution of man by socialization, organization, and technology, through which man gains power over nature or himself. Transhumanism, power over nature to deliver and save him from suffering and pain, which pain and infections, case numbers, these things are intolerable to utopians. We must stamp out all disease at all costs. The possible implications of such a utopian vision were foreseen by George Orwell in his dystopian novel 1984, where it was foreseen by Orwell in his where he envisages the problem confronting all utopian dreams, and that is fallen man's exercise of power is demonic. Only power for the sake of power is expressed when man usurps the prerogatives of God. And here's what O'Brien says in a noted passage in 1984. Power is in inflicting pain and humiliation. Power is in tearing human minds to pieces and putting them together again in new shapes of your own choosing. Do you begin to see then what kind of world we're creating? It is the exact opposite of the stupid hedonistic utopias that the old reformers imagined. A world of fear and treachery and torment, a world of trampling and being trampled upon, a world which will grow not less but more merciless as it refines itself. Progress in our world will be progress toward more pain. Already we are breaking down the habits of thought which have survived from before the revolution. We have cut the links between child and parent, and between man and man, and between man and woman. No one dares trust a wife or a child or a friend any longer. But in the future, there will be no wives and no friends. Children will be taken from their mothers at birth, as one takes eggs from a hen. The sex instinct will be eradicated. Procreation will be an annual formality like the renewal of a ration card. There will be no loyalty except loyalty toward the party. There will be no loyalty except loyalty to the health authorities. There will be no love except the love of Big Brother. There will be no art, no literature, no science. When we are omnipotent, we shall have no more need of science. When we are transhuman, we will have no more need of science. There will be no distinction between beauty and ugliness. There will be no distinction between man and woman. There will be no curiosity, no employment of the process of life. All competing pleasures will be destroyed. But always, do not forget this, Winston, always there will be the intoxication of power, constantly increasing and constantly growing subtler. Always at every moment there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on the enemy who is helpless. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. Now, this is a powerful image of man's sin coming to self-conscious realization where man, as the new God, gains the sensation of pseudo-omnipotence in this collectivist order. Playing God. Man playing God. That's the logical progression. A boot on the face forever. Okay, let's take a look at the poll question. Which U.S. state will host the first live quarantine camp? Notice we didn't ask if. We asked when. So out of 108 votes so far, out of the choices I've given, 72%. It looks like California would win even if we had all 50 listed here. Or 51 or whatever it is today. 72%. 4% say Wyoming. 10% say Alabama. And the reason I gave you those is because, you know, here, you see California, a lot of people out there. So you'd have to have a regional facility there. Down here in FEMA Region 6, you can imagine it could be Texas. Probably would be in Texas or Oklahoma. Perhaps New Mexico, but might be a little severe there. I'm thinking probably northern Texas. Think Section 4 over here. That's why I included Alabama. Section 7 right in the middle. Who knows? Section 8 covers 5 states, 5 big states, but not highly populated except for Colorado, I guess, North and South Dakota. Section 5 covers your Illinois, your Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio, Minnesota. And then we've got the Northwest and highly, densely populated areas, of course, New York. So I would imagine maybe people from that area might be taken to a different region. Who knows? Who knows? But these are the regions that FEMA has divided the country up into. So you can imagine that if there could only be 10 facilities, which would imagine that would be pretty full. But of course, that doesn't seem to be the case because we do seem to have facilities all over the place. Now, I don't know what the capabilities of each one of these are, but you can look it up for yourself. Our poll question today was which state will host the first live quarantine camp? First U.S. state. It's already happening around the world. 72% of you said California, 4% Wyoming, 10% Oregon. Nobody said Alabama. I don't know. You know, if you look down here in the sector 4, region 4, it looks like Alabama might be a good choice. Perhaps southern Georgia or Florida, maybe. Let's see what the comments say here. Michael Guimond says, I'm in Portland. It's bad and getting worse here. Michael Teza says, California is an open portal to all things evil. It all gets tried for the first time in California or Canada, seems like lately. Dawn Jerger says, I would say a red state because the government is continually attempting to paint conservatives as backward yahoos that are superstitious and dirty, unjabbed. Take, for example, the treatment of the deaths from the pandemic railed against in Florida and Texas last year as opposed to the nursing home death camps in New York. Right. It does seem an awful lot like, as we read in the article earlier, anyone who is resisting the official narrative is a Trump supporter or is a far-right wingnut. That's how the narrative goes. So the people who aren't really paying attention believe it. And so we're very easily divided up into ever smaller tribes. Sonny James says, absolutely, the language by the media mainstream directly reflects the language directed towards the Jews in World War II, except it's now the whites. It's not a war on whites per se. It's eugenics ideology. It's transracial too. Webb Du Bois, whose Black American wanted to use the ideology on his own population to rid them. He said of prostitutes and drug dealers, a social credit score system is definitely coming to America. Even atheist left channels are paying attention. This is the neoliberal agenda, eugenics disguised as progressive and hip. Mass death camps will be a part. Susie Q says, maybe California. It really doesn't matter, though. They'll be everywhere in no time. All right, thanks for those comments. Sonny James is saying here about even atheist left channels are paying attention to it. Yeah, you got very strong intellectual voices out there, like someone like Stefan Molyneux, who's been long since ejected off of YouTube. Atheist, I don't understand how he's still an atheist. He thinks and speaks so clearly, but he just can't seem to grasp that ultimate truth. He still needs to have himself as the absolute authority. Oh, but the freedom, the real true freedom you find when you realize that you're not God, when you realize that there is a God and that he's sovereign over it all, that there is no maverick molecule. I wish Stefan could join our ranks. Because I haven't heard many people tear apart communism as directly and boldly as he has. Perhaps Joe Boot has, though, in his book. Once again, I'll share this with you. Mission of God. Joseph Boot. Someone will say, oh, you want a theocracy, Brad. I didn't say anything about a theocracy. I just would, like for us to return to our traditional roots. But hey, what would be so wrong with a theocracy? After all, that's exactly what the global order is going after now. They're going after a theocracy. It's just that their God is science. All right. Thank you to Human Error for donating 5 pounds. 5 pounds of what? What, 5 pounds of beans? 5 pounds of rice? Oh, 5 pounds. 5 pounds. No euros anymore. That's cool. Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Let me say hello to Joe Powell. There's Don Jurger. There's Redux out in the chat. Sam Antoniades. This is a good name. Jackie Mendez is with us. The KCH is out there. Crystal's with us. Thanks for being here, folks. Cheyenne S is out there in the chat with us. And, of course, Paul Craven, 1984. Scuba Cat is out there, and many others. Thanks for being with us today, my friends. That'll be about all I have for you today. I want to leave you with an encouraging word. This one is from James White. God bless you, my friends. We'll see you again, Lord willing, on Thursday.
We live in a world of great beauty, and God has designed us to recognize it and to follow its direction to Himself. But we also live in a world of great evil, misery, and suffering, and each generation is called to struggle with the balance we must find between the beauty and the good, the evil and the ugliness. As Christians, we live in the now and the not yet, redeemed, but looking toward redemption, adopted as sons and daughters, yet looking forward to the fulfillment of that adoption. And we live as redeemed creatures, indwelt amazingly by the very same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead. We live a spiritual life in this physical world, and how we understand the world around us should be determined by our consistent, Spirit-actuated application of divine truths mined from the pages of Scripture. Christians suffer in this world just as everyone else, but our suffering has a different purpose and end. God has ordained that we are to be changed throughout the course of our lives, conformed to the image of Christ, our Lord, our Savior, and our example. As He suffered, so we suffer. As He patiently bore that suffering in doing the will of the Father, so we are called to walk in His footsteps, empowered by His Spirit. Scripture put it this way: Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our affliction, so that we will be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. For just as the sufferings of Christ are ours in abundance, so also our comfort is abundant through Christ. But if we are afflicted, it is for your comfort and salvation, or if we are comforted, It is for your comfort, which is effective in the patient enduring of the same sufferings which we also suffer. And our hope for you is firmly grounded, knowing that as you are sharers of our sufferings, so also you are sharers of our comfort. These words were first speaking of the sufferings of the apostles, but clearly tell us that in the coming generations, this would be the pattern. When we suffer, we look to the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort. God is the ultimate source of our comfort, for He is merciful even in the process of trying us and purging us of our impurities. But His purpose is even greater than this, for we then are used by the Spirit in the Father's plan to then be used by Him to comfort others who are likewise suffering in the body. This means that many times part of the reason of our suffering, our trials, our deep hurts, is to be found in the promise of God, that He will use us to comfort someone in the future who is enduring the same trial. Of course, this requires a foundational understanding of the reality that God is accomplishing His decree, His purpose in this creation, and that it is right and proper for Him to cause us to walk through deep valleys of darkness so as to make us more like Jesus in the end. We must trust that He is in fact the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort. And in that trust we come to appreciate His blessing us with our part in the body, our part in the fulfillment of His eternal purposes. Our sufferings glorify Him, make us like Jesus, and cause us to be a blessing to our fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. We can rejoice, even in the midst of the deepest sorrows, when we have come to understand through patient endurance, through a life of service and faith, for just as the sufferings of Christ are ours in abundance, so also our comfort is abundant through Christ.